Hi, this is Brad Smith from BeerSmith.com, and this video is going to show you how to set up and use an equipment profile in BeerSmith Mobile. Before you use BeerSmith Mobile, we strongly recommend you create an equipment profile to match your specific equipment setup. As every brewer has slightly different equipment, volumes and losses in this step are critical to getting accurate numbers from BeerSmith. Note that if you're an existing user of BeerSmith Desktop and already have an equipment profile on your desktop, you can use that profile in a recipe, transfer that recipe to your cloud folder, and then save the profile from that recipe by opening the recipe, clicking on your equipment profile, and then clicking on the Store button here at the bottom. But for now, we're going to go back and look at how to create a new equipment profile. Let's go into Profiles, go into Equipment, and if we click on the Add button, we can actually enter a new equipment profile. Rather than sitting here and typing it on the mobile device, though, I'm going to open my existing equipment profile and walk you through each field and show you how you fill it out. So I'm going to start with my equipment profile, Brad's Equipment. Click on the Edit button. And I usually like to start at the bottom. So what I do is I go down and fill out the batch volume first. This is the volume that goes into your fermenter. Most brewers brew either 5 or 10 gallon batches if they're brewing at home. Next, we can look at our fermenter loss. This is how much beer you lose during the fermenting process. Typically, a half gallon is very reasonable. Top-up water, just above that, is how much water is added at the end of the process before your wort goes into the fermenter. Now, typically, this is set to 0 if you're brewing all grain. However, if you're an extract brewer and you end up boiling with 2 or 3 gallons of water and you want to actually get 5 into the fermenter, you might add 3 gallons here, for example. You might top this up. Next is the true loss. This is what happens. This is all the stuff that's left at the bottom of the boiler after you boiled your wort off. Now, in my case, I lose quite a bit in my boiler, typically about a gallon. Moving up farther, we now enter the boiler section. First, we look at the hop utilization, which I always set to 100%. In fact, this setting is actually used for commercial brewers. So unless you're brewing equipment profiles that are over 20 gallons, so unless you're basically running a microbrewery, this should always be set to 100%. If you are brewing in a microbrewery, sometimes this is set much higher. Typically, commercial brewers get utilizations of 125, 150%, or even more. The cooling loss, I typically leave at 4%. That's the default value. And then next, we look at our boil-off value. I lose about a gallon per hour when I boil. The boil time for most brewers is either 60 or 90 minutes, typically. Next, we can calculate our boil volume automatically. I do recommend checking that box and calculating the volume automatically. What this does is this makes sure everything adds up so that you get the right amount of wort out of your boiler. And then accounting for all of your losses, you get the right amount into the fermenter. The kettle top-up number is not typically used for all grain brewers or extract brewers, but is sometimes used by partial mash brewers who add water as they're going into the kettle, because typically they're mashing with a small amount of water and then adding a larger amount of water to the kettle as they go into the boil. The mash section at the top is only used for all grain brewers. But if you're brewing all grain, you're going to specify things like your mash tun volume, 5 gallons in this case, your mash tun weight. This helps calculate the thermal mass and how much the temperatures need to be adjusted to compensate for your mash tun. The mash tun specific heat is typically a value between 0.1 and 0.5, with higher numbers being for things with higher thermal mass, like plastic, for example, has a typical specific heat of around 0.3. Whereas if you have a stainless steel mash tun, it's going to have a lower number, maybe 0.15 or something like that. And then finally, your tun dead space. This is the dead space that's actually below the filter that's used in your mashing lautering process. And you have an adjust mash volume for dead space, which allows you to add more water. Basically, it adds more water to the first step in the mash to compensate for that dead space if you want to maintain a constant water to grain ratio. So these are things you worry about if you're actually mashing and doing an all grain setup. And finally, the overall brew house efficiency, again, is really only used for all grain or partial mash brewers. and this represents your overall brew house efficiency for your entire system. Typical numbers are in the 65 to 75% range. This is lower than the mash efficiency that's often quoted, because mash efficiency just includes the mash, whereas brew house efficiency includes losses throughout the whole system. So that includes losses during the boil and losses afterwards, like your trube losses. So that's basically how you set up an equipment profile in BeerSmith Mobile. If you push the save button, it'll save your equipment profile. So now it's saved. You can go back and see it in the listing here. And if you go all the way out, you can create a new recipe. For example, we'll go to My Recipes. We'll click on the Add button. And you can go down here and you can actually pick your new profile that you just created. Now you've got a new recipe created that matches your particular equipment. Equipment profiles can also be used to scale existing recipes. So for example, I could pick this Muddy Pig Oatmeal Stout. I could edit it. And I could go down here and click on the Scale button. And I can actually scale that to match my particular equipment profile. And if I do that, it's going to scale everything, all the ingredients in this recipe and everything, to match my particular set of equipment. So that gives you a brief overview of how to use equipment profiles in BeerSmith Mobile. Both create your own and how you can use them within a recipe. Thank you for listening. And if you want to learn more about BeerSmith Desktop or BeerSmith Mobile, please visit my website at beersmith.com.